Hey, California Dreaming listeners. My name is Keith Sharon. When I'm not listening to Roseanne Sinclair spin amazing true crime tales, I'm the host of a podcast called Crime Beat, which is produced by the Southern California News Group. We produce a deep dive narrative podcast about fascinating cases in Southern California. Crime Beat Season 1 was called Stealing Nixon's Millions, and it was about the biggest bank heist in the history of the United States. That story was the inspiration for the 2019 movie Finding Steve McQueen, with Forrest Whitaker, Travis Fimmel, Rachel Taylor, and William Fichtner. Season 2 was called Mom vs. Murderer. It focused on the murder of Kathy Torres, the Cal State Fullerton student who was found stabbed 74 times in the trunk of her own car. Please subscribe on Apple or wherever you get your podcasts. We're currently working on an incredible case for Season 3. Coming soon.
California Dreaming is brought to you by BLUBRRY. You know, there is a little bit more to making a podcast than just talking into a mic and hitting publish. You need more than that. And I'm talking about a reliable hosting service so your time can be spent working on your show. You also want accurate download numbers, you want to see the audience that you're reaching, and you're going to want a webpage that is simple and easy to work with. That's why I choose BLUBRRY. With its simple media hosting and fully integrated WordPress website, it can't get any easier. So if you host a show or if you're thinking about starting one, visit www.orbitaljigsaw.com/dream to give BLUBRRY a try for a month for free. BLUBRRY's support team will be right there every step of the way to help you migrate over so you won't lose any of your subscribers in the process. And if you're brand new to this, they can get your new show up and running. And with a month for free to try it out using promo code DREAM, what have you got to lose? There are a number of ways that you can support California Dreaming. You can follow us on Facebook, Instagram, and Twitter. You can spread the word about the show. You can recommend us in podcast and true crime fan groups, and you can leave the show a rating and a review on iTunes or whichever platform you listen to the show on. And if you would like to go a little above and beyond, you can also support the show on our Patreon. For as little as $1 a month, you can gain access to one exclusive bonus per month, and there are currently more than 30 episodes that you can binge. So it's a good deal for just $1. And if you're not interested in a monthly donation, you can help with a one-time donation to the show through our PayPal using the email californiapod@gmail.com. As some of you may know, I have been talking about my family and I leaving California and moving to Nevada sometime in the near future. I've mentioned it a little bit on social media, and the closer we get to that time, I'll know more about when and where. We are always still going to be the same show, though. We are going to technically be only about 40 or 50 miles away from California. We may cover some cases out in Nevada, but California is always going to be my favorite place to talk about. I really did enjoy the 2 most recent Patreon bonuses in Australia. And if you're not a subscriber, there is one Patreon bonus that covers the death of American scuba diver Tina Watson when she was on her honeymoon in 2003. And the second bonus is at the $5 and above tier level, and it's about the 1998 disappearance of American scuba divers Tom and Eileen Lonergan when the dive company that they were with accidentally left them behind, returning to port without them on board. I learned a great deal about Australia and scuba diving, and I hope to find more interesting stories from around the world to cover. So if you listening would like more vacation series episodes, I've made a post on the Facebook page for you to leave your suggestions. I put that up yesterday. So make sure you go and check that out and leave your suggestions in the comments. So in November, I read a story in the Orange County Register, and it's about the case that I'm going to cover today. Now, as I was writing and researching this particular part in the beginning of this case, I was actually in Nevada for a Super Bowl party at my in-laws' house. And I normally don't go, but, it's my work in progress in terms of trying to become acclimated to life there in Nevada, so I'm trying. So naturally, I was holed up in my room thinking about you and my listeners and the show and crime and the next episode. So when I saw this article back in November, I jotted it down because I knew it would be one that I would want to cover. And when I looked around for more information, there just really wasn't a whole lot out there, unfortunately, because it's kind of a mystery. But the story stood out to me because it started off in Huntington Beach, California, which is where I currently live, and it ends there in southern Nevada, which is where I think I'm going to be living. It is an older case. It is unsolved. The details surrounding the story are very interesting, and I'm hoping to try and come up with some ideas and theories as to what may have possibly happened and how this happened and why this happened. And we'll try to get to the bottom of it in this 132nd episode of California Dreaming, the tale of the Marine in Lake Mead. Before we get into the story, let's talk about the location of where this all takes place. You may or may not have heard of Lake Mead. If you are from the southwestern part of the United States, it is likely that you at least know of it. It is a man-made lake that straddles the border of Nevada and Arizona. The lake is on the Colorado River, and it was formed as a result of the construction of the Hoover Dam, which took place during the Great Depression, so the early 30s. Lake Mead is located about 24 miles or 40 kilometers southeast from the Las Vegas Strip. And when it is at its capacity, it is the largest reservoir in the United States and supplies water to Arizona, California, Nevada, and some parts of Mexico. Because of drought, the lake has not been at its full capacity since 1983 and has actually been smaller than the second largest reservoir, Lake Powell, another man-made lake that straddles the northern border of Arizona and the southern border of Utah. Lake Mead is named after Elwood Mead, who served as the commissioner of the U.S. Bureau of Reclamation from 1924 to 1936, the time period during which the Boulder Canyon project was underway that led to the building of the Hoover Dam and ultimately the creation of the lake, and today remains a popular recreation destination throughout the year. As for our case today, there sadly is not a great deal of information out there, and there really hasn't been any sort of in-depth investigation that has attempted to retrace the events of the days leading up to June 18, 1997. As I mentioned in the beginning, I read about this case in a November 17, 2019 article in the Orange County Register written by journalist Keith Sharon. I'll be referencing the article throughout, and I'd like to try to piece together a possible theory or a couple of theories as to what may have happened here. Now, since the time that I wrote that introduction, I actually had the pleasure of getting in touch with Keith Sharon. That was him who you heard in the introduction of this episode. He is a journalist with the Orange County Register, and he is the host of the Crime Beat podcast. And apparently there are two podcasts that share that title. One of them is Canadian, his is the other. And I had postponed this particular episode for 1 week so I could work out a time to discuss this case with him. I have yet to talk to him. I've talked to him briefly over Messenger, but we are going to discuss this case further later on this week. And when I do, I will write an addendum to this episode so that I can add any additional information, make any corrections, things like that. I'm going to go ahead and record this as I wrote it, and then I'll come back with an addendum to add to it after I speak to Keith. I do make some ruminations about the family of the victim, and I want to be clear, it is not uncommon for me, us, to try to figure out a puzzling character by contemplating the things that we don't have firsthand knowledge about. And because this case is a mystery, I'm going to do lots of speculating and question asking. I did talk to Keith about theories, and he told me that as a journalist, he just doesn't go there. But, dreamers, I totally go there because we don't have any answers, and I want to try to find some that make sense. So let's get into it. Staff Sergeant Ron Parkhurst joined the United States Marine Corps in 1984. And according to an interview with the Orange County Register, his Master Sergeant, Rene Robles, called him a really good Marine, stating, "You could see him from a mile away. He was quiet and well-mannered. He always stood up straight, whether he was in military attire or civilian clothing." By 1997, Ron had proudly served this country for 13 years with unqualified dedication, exhibited in a record that reflected his commitment to excellence. And this ultimately led him to working as a recruiter out of a Huntington Beach, California substation, where he worked with young people, potential future enlistees, and shared with them what being a Marine meant to him. Ron was said to have been a resident of nearby Irvine, California. However, sometime on or around Sunday, June 15th, 1997, Ron left his job behind. He left his family behind. He left his loved ones. He left California. He got into his 1995 black Ford Mustang GT and made the 270-mile or 435-kilometer drive to Las Vegas. He would spend the next 3 days or so gambling, withdrawing money from his bank account, though not large sums, but pretty much most of what he had left. He was in and out of casinos. He checked in and out of a Motel 6. And then, about 6 days later, Ron was found dead, floating in Lake Mead with a fatal gunshot wound to the back of the head. To this day, Ron Parkhurst's murder is unsolved. So, what happened? Well, we know that Ron had an appointment with a new recruit and that recruit's family that Sunday, the 15th of June, and it was an appointment that Ron failed to keep. The ensuing investigation revealed that Ron did indeed drive to Las Vegas on that day, and he did so alone. He checked into a Motel 6 located just off the strip on Tropicana when he arrived in town. It is about a 4 to 4.5 hour drive, and on a Sunday, headed out of California and into Nevada, traffic is generally pretty light. Then early in the morning of June 16th, Ron checked out of the Motel 6, but he came back later on that evening and checked back in, only to check back out again early on the morning of the 17th. So what exactly does this checking in and checking out mean? On the surface, it seems a little odd. However, to me, it tells of a person who really doesn't have all that much of a plan. The trip to Vegas was obviously something that he did spur of the moment or on a whim. The reasons for that we could try and figure out, but we can say with a degree of certainty that Ron did not have a reservation at the Motel 6. And for a Sunday night and a Monday night on a non-holiday weekend like that, it isn't going to be hard to find a room. Not just at a little Motel 6, but at any of the large hotels or casinos on the Strip. You don't need a reservation if they've got rooms available, and it is likely they've got rooms. So if you wanted to come to Las Vegas on a Sunday or a Monday, it's not a big deal getting a room just about anywhere. And in some cases, some of the bigger casinos, you might even find something just as cheap, if not cheaper, than a motel off the Strip. Now on Super Bowl weekend, I checked the rates for the following weekend. On the weekend of the Super Bowl, rates are slightly higher, and in a couple of weeks, when it's Valentine's Day, the rates are going to be higher then as well. But for Sunday, February 9th, a room at the Motel 6 on Tropicana is $40. A room at the Excalibur Hotel and Casino is $27. Now granted, the Excalibur isn't exactly the Bellagio or the Venetian, which did not exist at that time anyway, but it is certainly not the Motel 6 either. My point is, I don't know if Ron picked the Motel 6 because he wanted to stay low-key and off the Vegas Strip, or if he thought he was saving money, or maybe he thought he needed a reservation to stay at the hotel casinos where he'd ultimately end up gambling, or if he simply didn't want to deal with the hassle of navigating through the traffic and the crowds of staying at a large hotel. It is much easier just getting in and out of the Motel 6 than trying to get in and out of a large hotel and casino complex on the Vegas Strip. So, in between all of Ron's checking in and checking out of the Motel 6, he was said to be gambling at the MGM Grand. Now, the MGM had been around since 1975, but in 1990, the original site of the hotel and casino was shut down and ground was broken at its current location in 1991, with the brand new MGM Grand Hotel and Casino opening in December of 1993. So at the time when Ron skipped out on work to go gambling there in 97, it was still a relatively new complex. The hotel itself had undergone an extensive refurbishment in 1996 and was still under a $250 million renovation at the time of Ron's visit. It seems weird to have so much extensive work done on a relatively newly finished project, but the reasons for that are because the vision of what the MGM was to be, the interior of the place, the centerpiece of the complex was a giant replica of the Emerald City from The Wizard of Oz. And I had been there a couple of times before the Emerald City was dismantled. But I thought it was really nice, a nice homage to the movie. But the whole concept performed very poorly. So it was completely gutted in order to attract more visitors and tourists. That's why they put more millions of dollars into renovating it again. So I wondered why Ron chose to gamble at the MGM out of all the casinos. It could have been any number of reasons. And I think that I've read that Ron enjoyed going to Vegas and enjoyed gambling. I'm not quite sure on that. Or it was a theory that he enjoyed gambling. Vegas is a very quick and easy getaway. It's a good, fun vacation destination. If you live in Southern California, a weekend jaunt to Vegas is not an uncommon thing to do. And at that time, before the Vegas Strip completely evolved into what it is today, the MGM was one of the premier places to visit. As I said, the MGM opened its doors in December of 1993. Then there seemed to have been somewhat of a hotel casino boom that followed. The Stratosphere opened in 96, New York in 97, Bellagio in 98, Mandalay Bay, the Venetian, and Paris in 99, the Wynn in 2005, the Palazzo in 2007, the Encore in 2008, City Center in 2009, and the Cosmopolitan in 2010. So all the fancy places opened in the decade and change following Ron's visit. The MGM was one of the newest and most popular places to visit and stay. It is also right off the freeway if you exit at Tropicana. It is one of those places that you can't miss. So coming from Southern California, one of the largest and easiest exits to get off at is Tropicana. And if you turn right, you go about a block, and right there in front of your face was the gigantic MGM lion staring right at you on the corner of Tropicana and Las Vegas Boulevard. If you go a little past that, keeping on Tropicana, you will run into the Motel 6 less than a block past the MGM, right in the shadow of McCarran International Airport. The MGM would be on your left, the Motel 6 on the right. And I think Ron just got off the freeway at Tropicana, passed the MGM, spotted the Motel 6 right away, and turned in. I don't think there was much of a plan beyond that. I think he picked it out of pure convenience based on the location of everything. And to be honest, it would probably take a lot less time to get into the Motel 6 and walk over to the MGM as opposed to trying to find your way into the MGM complex, navigate the parking garage, trying to find the best place to park in order to get to the reservations desk. And like I said, he probably didn't have a reservation for the Motel 6, much less for a stay at the MGM. And then to try and check in, then go up into the hotel towers to look for your room, drop all your stuff off, and make the journey back down into the casino. It's like a big hassle. Going to the Motel 6 eliminates all of that, especially if he's planning to check in and check out and check in and check out again like he did. It would be really inconvenient for him to have done all of that staying at one of the rooms in the MGM. The only other resort on that corner of Tropicana and Las Vegas Boulevard is the Excalibur Resort, that I mentioned a moment ago, which is catty corner to the MGM. It would have been further to get to by walking than the MGM, and you can probably tell by the name of the place that it has a medieval theme, and it is considered to be a more family-oriented resort with plenty of entertainment and accommodations for children. Many resorts are like that nowadays, but there was a time when most of the large casinos only catered to gambling adults. So, without having to travel any further than the corner of Tropicana and Las Vegas Boulevard, the likely choice between the two places for a guy in town on his own would have been the MGM. And also remember, at this time I mentioned the MGM was under some major construction and renovations. So it's not always the most desirable place to stay if you're planning a vacation with your family. You're not going to want to be going through construction zones every single time you come and go from the place. So it would not be unusual for the MGM to have seen a dip in business during renovations. And again, it's not a holiday weekend, but that's not to say that there isn't plenty going on with the MGM at the time now. The location, the venue was still making headlines in the year before, and even in the weeks following the events surrounding Ron's mysterious excursion to Vegas that weekend in June. What headlines am I speaking of? Well, let me tell you. If you recall, just 9 months earlier, hip-hop artist Tupac Shakur was shot in a still unsolved drive-by shooting on September 7, 1996, just after leaving the Mike Tyson vs. Bruce Sheldon boxing match, which had been held at the MGM Garden Arena earlier that evening. He, along with Death Row Records founder Suge Knight, who we discussed previously back in episode 79, take a listen to that if you want to know more about him and his extensive criminal history. Suge Knight and Tupac were stopped at a red light on Koval and Flamingo, which is literally 1 block over and 1 block up from the MGM and the Motel 6. When a white Cadillac pulled up alongside their vehicle, the window came down and somebody inside opened fire. Tupac was hit twice in the chest, once in the arm, once in the thigh, and one of the bullets having entered into his right lung. Suge Knight was struck in the head by some bullet fragments, but otherwise was unharmed, and Tupac succumbed to his injuries 6 days later on September 13, 1996, having been pronounced dead that afternoon at the age of 25. Mike Tyson had won the WBA heavyweight title in that fight with Bruce Sheldon. And it would be just 2 months later in the same arena at the MGM that Tyson would be back to defend the title for the first time against Evander Holyfield on November 9th, 1996. And it was a fight that Holyfield won by technical knockout in the 11th round when the referee stepped in and stopped the match, bringing about what is considered to be one of the biggest upsets in boxing history and making Holyfield the first heavyweight fighter since Muhammad Ali to win a heavyweight belt 3 times. Tyson and Holyfield would meet up a little more than 7 months later, again at the MGM Grand Arena, for what was billed as Tyson Holyfield 2, and this fight would take place just 2 weeks after Ron Parkhurst inexplicably went AWOL and headed to Vegas. And this would be that infamous fight where in the 3rd round, Tyson took a 1-inch bite out of Holyfield's ear cartilage and spit it onto the floor of the ring. I believe Tyson was slightly enraged by what was ruled an unintentional headbutt in the 2nd round that had apparently opened up a cut above his eye, which, this is early in the fight, and it's probably not going to get any better from there. And if Tyson's corner isn't going to be able to control the bleeding, there was a very good chance that the referee could stop the fight and end it in another disappointing TKO for Holyfield. And what had apparently exacerbated Tyson even more was the fact that the referee deemed the headbutt unintentional, so Holyfield didn't lose points because of it. So Holyfield's ears seemed to be bleeding uncontrollably, and he was given the win by way of disqualification, which, considering the fight was one of the most lucrative pay-per-view events ever, was highly disappointing for those who shelled out the money to see it on TV, but also all of the money people paid for ringside seats. Anyway, Tyson was fined $3 million for that bite, and his boxing license in the state of Nevada was revoked, but it was reinstated about a year later. Sorry, that was massively off topic, but I just wanted to put the MGM into some sort of context for us at the time that this story took place. After the MGM was built, the Grand Garden Arena opened and it became the premier location for not only boxing matches but other televised events, and continues to do so to this day, boxing included. There are also concerts, the Country Music Awards is coming up there, as well as the Billboard Music Awards. So Ron chose a popular place to spend his time gambling, despite all of the construction going on at the time. Over the course of the next 3 days, from the time that Ron arrived in Las Vegas on June 15th until June 18th, he was apparently in the MGM Grand in and out several times. He used his ATM card to make withdrawals that ranged from $60 to $200. In total, Ron was said to have withdrawn about $500 over the course of those 3 days. And it's been reported that when he was finished, all that remained in his account was a little more than $53. According to the Orange County Register, the final withdrawal was made on June 18th, and that amount was $60. And what was left was a balance of $53.85. Relatively speaking, that is not a large sum of money, considering Ron's line of work. He's got 13 years with the Marines, and to only have less than $600 in his checking account, I mean, it happens. You know, there could have been some debt, there could have been lots of bills. I'll delve more into his personal life in a little bit, but at the time he lived in Irvine, which is by no means a cheap place to live. Whether he rented or owned, it's not going to be cheap, and I believe he rented an apartment. And he reportedly lived there alone as far as anyone knows. Ron was driving a pretty nice car that was about 2 years old, which he was said to have consistently kept up in immaculate condition. Yet he had less than $600 in the bank, at least that he had access to by way of his ATM card linked to his checking account. He may very well have had savings that he couldn't access, but I'll talk more about his money situation a little bit later. I am not certain of the last time Ron was known to have been in the MGM Grand, but whatever time it was, it must have been really early in the morning of June 18th, like sometime between midnight and maybe about 3 in the morning. And the final ATM withdrawal must have been made in that early time frame as well, because his vehicle was towed by 5:30 that same morning. According to the Orange County Register, it was said that Ron was wearing cutoff jeans and a red and white t-shirt as he walked out of the casino. Though the article did not specify if he was captured on casino surveillance wearing these things, or if he was still wearing these clothes when he was found, it didn't specify. The next thing to have happened that is known for sure is that Ron's Mustang was discovered abandoned at the entrance of the Desert Princess cruise boat dock at Lake Mead around 4 in the morning on Wednesday, June 18th. It was subsequently towed about an hour and a half later. Remember, I mentioned at the beginning that this would be a good 25 miles or 40 kilometers from the Las Vegas Strip, and also that much further away from Southern California, where he initially came from. It was later determined that Ron's CD collection was missing from his vehicle, which was apparently quite an extensive collection. His wallet was still inside the car, but his driver's license and his ATM were also missing. Ron's sister, Diane Garrett, who spoke to the Register about her brother's case, said that she was told by Las Vegas Metro Police investigators that a witness at the scene reported seeing a second car speeding away from Ron's Mustang that morning. How much or how little that was followed up on, I don't know. On Saturday, June 21st, 1997, at approximately 10 in the morning, 6 days after Ron had arrived in Las Vegas, he was found floating in the water near Saddle Island Cove. He had been shot one time in the lower back occipital area of the skull with a .45 caliber gun, and the medical examiner determined based on the condition of Ron's body that he had been in the water for about 3 days. So this means he was placed in the water just about the same time his car was found abandoned by the lake. So now, this is where I'm going to say that I feel like both the Navy, the Naval Criminal Investigative Service, or the NCIS, and the Las Vegas Metro Police both dropped the ball when it came to the investigation into Ron's death. They both came to the determination that Ron's death was a homicide. Okay, yeah, it's pretty obvious to most of us anyway. The Las Vegas police called it a murder WDW, meaning with a deadly weapon. But as for the NCIS, according to the Orange County Register, it said, quote, "Due to the lack of logical investigative leads, this investigation is closed," unquote. The NCIS stated that if any suspects are identified or if the Las Vegas Metro Police come up with any new information or if they ask for assistance in the case, then they would reopen it. And that is it from the NCIS report from June of 1997. So they didn't even close the case before the month of Ron's death came to a close. Why? Why did the NCIS close an unsolved murder? Well, apparently this is classified information because when you Google the NCIS and cold unsolved cases, all the top results talk about how dedicated the NCIS is when it comes to working cold cases, how they're never forgotten, how they've put in years of work, and how their investigations are dogged. But for some reason, Ron Parkhurst's name is nowhere in the conversation. Because the NCIS closed his case pretty much before his body was cold. So what's the deal with that? It looks to me as though the NCIS is leaving control over Ron's case to the Las Vegas Metro Police, which may very well be their prerogative. I don't see why they would need to officially label the case as closed, though. To me, it gives a story an ending where there isn't one, and I don't think that's fair to Ron's family. And I wondered if it was because Ron was technically AWOL, or absent without leave, and the military would just rather sweep it under the rug? Perhaps. I don't know that either. But I mean, he was still a Marine. He's down, and he's kind of been forgotten. And that's the opposite of what the Marine Corps and all the branches of the United States military stand for, right? So what kind of evidence do we have here? Well, you think that this would be basic police investigating 101, right? We would like to know some of the key details and elements of what was going on with Ron in the days, perhaps even weeks, leading up to his death. So he was a no-show for his last meeting with the family of one of his recruits, and then he just up and left for Vegas? Did he have a cell phone? I don't know. Nothing I read says that he did or didn't. Was his phone checked up on, his phone records, from his office or his apartment? Who was he talking to in the days leading up to him essentially going AWOL? Were the people that he spoke to tracked down and interviewed and investigated? Did they go over all of Ron's contacts to try and figure out why he went to Vegas? And perhaps maybe the police know more than they're letting the public know because the case is unsolved and they're keeping everything close to the vest. That may very well be the case. So then Ron checked into the Motel 6. Did anyone go and talk to the employees there? Did they interview the front desk clerk or the housekeeping staff or anyone else who may have been working there at the time? Or anyone else who might have been staying there at the time? Did anyone see Ron in the company of anyone else? Did he come and go with somebody? Did he use the phone there, and if so, who did he call? Was the room he stayed in processed for evidence? If so, what was found? I mean, this case is more than 20 years old, but it is not beyond the scope of DNA collecting and testing. Though not as advanced as it's become since, it certainly wasn't in its infancy. And what about the Mustang? Who was the last person to drive Ron's car? Was it Ron himself? Were there fingerprints? Was there DNA? Any blood? Anything inside the vehicle other than his CDs, driver's license, and ATM card being missing? Apparently, the Las Vegas Metro Police did process the car, and they said that they got some DNA, but it was quote-unquote inconclusive. Okay, so what does that mean? What did that mean in 1997, and what does that mean today? Is this DNA still in evidence somewhere? I mean, the NCIS officially closed Ron's case, so does that mean they weren't going to hang on to the evidence in this case either? Based on the minimal amount of information here, I can't even tell you, listening, where exactly it was Ron was shot. Was he shot there at the lake, then just dumped into the water? Was he shot maybe at the motel? Was he shot in the car? If so, did anybody hear a gunshot? Was anybody around? And were any of the locations where Ron was known to have been processed for a possible crime scene? And if Ron was killed at the lake, did nobody hear this gunshot? Because apparently someone saw a vehicle speeding away from Ron's Mustang. Isn't it likely that they would have heard the shot too? It seems that he would have been shot at the lake. But does that mean he drove there on his own volition? Was he being forced to drive there by someone holding him at gunpoint? And if he did drive there on his own, did he know that somebody was following him? Did he know the person who was following him to the lake, or did somebody travel with him in his car? There is not any indication that I know of that Ron was shot inside his own vehicle, so it leaves my biggest questions unanswered. How did Ron end up at Lake Mead? Did he drive himself? Did someone else drive him? Did he drive together with another person? Or did he drive in tandem with one or two other people? We simply don't know the answers to any of these questions. At this point, anything is possible. Back in California, Ron's apartment was searched, and it was discovered that Ron may have purchased a life insurance policy in the months prior to his death. But according to the article in the Register, this was never followed up on, which is pretty careless if you ask me. So many cases like this, the investigators needed to follow the money. And there are some things about Ron's personal life that I wanted to discuss with you. So, the article in the Register gave a little bit of a background about Ron growing up. He was a cross-country runner back in high school in Peoria, Illinois. Of him, his sister said, quote, "He was always this kid with an impish kind of personality. If he got in trouble, he would smile. He never took things seriously. He was always joking," unquote. And then after high school, looking for a little more structure in his life, Ron chose to enlist in the military. He was trained as an aircraft mechanic. So other than that, Ron's sister Diane did not really expand a whole lot in terms of Ron as a child, as an adolescent, and growing up. At least, that's all that was published in the article. The description of being impish kind of stood out to me. And it kind of means like playful and mischievous in sort of a naughty but not a terrible way. That he really didn't take anything seriously, even if he was getting in trouble for something. And his solution to straightening out his life was to go into the Marines. I really wish I had more details because, like so many aspects of this case, it leaves us wondering so much more than we really should have to. But I understand the desire to want to keep some details private. But at the same time, we could perhaps have more of an understanding of why things went the way they did for Ron if we knew where he'd come from and what he'd gone through. But all I can deduce from what his sister has said about him is that Ron needed stability in his life, and he went into the Marines to find it. which is just about as extreme as you can go if you're feeling like your life is unstable or directionless or out of control. I don't know which one it is. It could have been all of that. But Diane specifically said seeking stability. So he was actively looking for that. It was either turmoil in his life or a desire to really want to get away from that. So if Ron had a difficult upbringing, it could have an effect on how he dealt with things as an adult, especially if there are some things that are left unresolved that he just ran away from, rather than dealing with it head on and being able to move on without anything residual hanging over him. And then to go on to train as an aircraft mechanic means that Ron was a very skilled person. And by all accounts, his record with the military was exemplary. So, for at least a while, Ron was able to put whatever instability that he had in his life before the military behind him and move on successfully into his military career. That is until he walked away that June of '97. Now, there is something strange and possibly somewhat troubling going on in Ron's personal life. After he enlisted in the Marines, prior coming to California, Ron was stationed in Tennessee. And while he was there, he met a woman named Rebecca Carolyn DeLoach. According to the register, Rebecca had been married and divorced twice, and by Valentine's Day of 1992, Ron became husband number 3. The odd thing is that Ron didn't share with his family that he and Rebecca had gotten married. As a matter of fact, his sister said in her interview that when she would call Ron once a week, she would inquire as to who the woman was answering the phone, and he would explain that she was his housekeeper. Eventually, Ron and Rebecca relocated to California, which put enough distance between himself and his family so he wouldn't really have to be answering too many questions. So some of you might think that this is strange, and some of you might understand to an extent when it comes to how much or how little you're willing to share with your family. This goes back to what I alluded to earlier about his family dynamics and the bits and pieces that his sister was willing to share about him growing up and what it could have possibly meant when she said that he chose the Marines in order to find stability in his life. It's vague, so we are left to speculate. But that, coupled with the fact that he was hiding this relationship from his family, adds another layer to this whole thing. Now, based on the numerous conversations that all of you and I have had over the last year or so about our own family dysfunction and chaos, it wouldn't surprise me if many of us, myself included, kept some of the most personal details of our lives to ourselves and away from our families. Our families can be judgmental and critical, and sometimes we just don't want to hear it. So it's better and healthier and safer to just keep them at a certain distance so we can spare our feelings and the feelings of those we do want around us and the ones we want to keep close to us. Many of us have put up walls to protect ourselves, and many times it's our families who are the impetus for those very walls. So even not knowing Ron or his situation, I don't think that there's all that much unusual about wanting to keep his family out of his personal life. But just like everything else, it makes us circle back to his upbringing, whatever issues he had growing up, and how that all would eventually play out in the last days of Ron's life. I mean, even if it did at all. The fact is, most people don't hide the fact that they're married from their families. And most people don't spontaneously walk out on their lives. And sadly, most of the time when we hear these stories, we never really get a full explanation as to why it happened in the first place. It's kind of like Lyle Stevick. Remember him up in Washington State? Although he took his own life, whereas in our story here, Ron was apparently murdered, and I say apparently because there are some theories about it. Lyle Stevick continues to remain a mystery even though he's been identified. His family has decided to maintain his privacy. My point is, Ron kept his secrets. He didn't tell his family of his marriage. And when he met his master sergeant around 1995, Ron told him that he was single. And from what we know, he appeared to have been living alone at his apartment in Irvine. However, when Ron did die, Rebecca was the one who completed the necessary paperwork for declaring not only herself as a dependent, but also a son named Justin, who was born in 1993. Whether or not Justin is Ron's biological son is unknown, but if she was legally married to him at the time, then her son would have been his dependent and they would have been the beneficiaries of his death benefits from the military. There is also that other insurance policy that he supposedly signed up for that wasn't really followed up on. Other than that, there is no other information available out there that I could find about Rebecca. She did not attend Ron's funeral, and when the Orange County Register reached out to her for their story about Ron, they were unable to get in touch with her. And we'll talk more about Rebecca once we start the speculation portion of this episode. When Ron was found deceased, his supervisor back in Huntington Beach at their recruiting offices was contacted, and it would be Master Sergeant Rene Robles who traveled to Las Vegas in order to provide a positive identification of Ron's body. And Ron was treated as any other fallen soldier would have been treated. Now, as David and I were driving back from Las Vegas the day after the Super Bowl, I was telling him all about this case. And I mentioned that I believe that Ron Parkhurst was technically considered AWOL. And he said that he saw this program about various AWOL situations and how they're not all treated the same. Like, for example, if you've been deployed and you are someplace where you are at war, if you listen to the second season of Serial, it covered the story of Bo Bergdahl. He was deployed in Afghanistan in 2009 when that June he walked away from his post, essentially going AWOL, but shortly thereafter was captured by the Taliban and held captive for 5 years. He was later court-martialed and eventually pled guilty to desertion and misbehavior before the enemy, and he was given a dishonorable discharge. But he is still technically a member of the Army today because his discharge is pending the exhaustion of all of his appeals, which apparently is still going on. Seems like a long time, but whatever. And just so we're clear, AWOL and desertion are essentially the same thing, except desertion is when you're just totally gone for more than a month. So the difference is time. But anyway, since Ron walked away from his comfy little office in Huntington Beach, California, and not from his wartime post in southern Afghanistan, it was likely not going to result in the same kind of harsh discipline that Bergdahl had been facing if he had returned from his spontaneous Vegas vacation. And I did ask Justin Rimmel his opinion on this. If you know Justin, the host of Mysterious Circumstances, he is a veteran. He was in the Marines. And Justin, thank you for your service. And Justin said that because it was only a few days, if he would have made it back, he would have been disciplined, but not nearly as bad as Bo Bergdahl was. And what that discipline may have been, I suppose, is just determined on a case-by-case basis. So, when Ron died, he was treated as a fallen Marine would have been. He was flown back to Illinois. Master Sergeant Robles flew with his casket, and as Ron was taken off the plane to be delivered to his family, the rest of the passengers on the plane stayed in their seats, and Robles described the moment for the register by saying, quote, "Everyone was just staring out of the windows of the plane. His parents were very hurt. They were in shock, in disbelief." Ron was laid to rest in his dress blues and given an honor guard funeral along with the flag folding ceremony, which was presented to his family. According to Ron's sister, both of their parents have since passed away, but did say that from the time that Ron died until the time that they died, Ron was never discussed. His name was never spoken, his death never spoken of. Even when the family would get together for special occasions or holidays, anything of the sort, Ron's parents never talked about him. What do you guys make of that? To me, it can mean one, maybe two things. It could be too painful to talk about, and his mom and dad simply didn't want to have to relive his loss and would rather just leave it in the past and keep moving forward. There are people like that just can't talk about a tragic loss without it causing them too much pain, far too much pain. But then there's that part of me that kind of thinks that leaving Ron's death in the past and never speaking of it for the rest of their lives is yet another component of the discord in the family. Because Ron didn't just die, he was murdered. So not talking about it is not the usual path families take in cases like this. Oftentimes, families know and understand the importance of speaking up on behalf of their murdered loved one. They turn to the media, they rally support, they demand answers, they call for justice, they harass law enforcement to no end until their case gets solved or until they're dead and gone. They organize vigils, they raise money, they produce flyers and billboards, they go on all the TV shows, they drum up media interest at every turn. Just a couple weeks ago, I listened to True Crime Garage, where they interviewed Julie Murray, sister of missing UMass student Maura Murray. And here we are, coming up on the 16th anniversary of Maura having gone missing in New Hampshire. And Julie made it clear more than once in her interview on that show that she wants everyone to talk about Maura. And she acknowledged all of the things and the rumors that we've heard about Maura all these years and said, yeah, those things happened. That is part of the narrative. But no matter, we still want Maura to remain relevant. I don't care what anyone thinks of her or of the Murray family. They just want to know what happened. They just want her kept in the conversation. All that just goes to say, still all these years later, when Julie Murray popped up on a popular podcast, many people were going to tune in and listen. Where honestly, February 9th, which happens to be today, the day I'm recording this, may very well have come and gone, and I would not have even noticed the 16th anniversary was upon us. Maybe you listening didn't even realize it either. But because Julie stepped up on a very public platform and said, I still want Maura's name out there, it got my attention, and it may have got some of yours as well. And that's my point. Those who are lost or missing or murdered and the cases aren't solved, if the family isn't willing to be their voice, they're going to be forgotten. So why would Ron's family decide to withdraw and remain silent while their son's murder went under-investigated and eventually went cold? Why wasn't anybody standing up and speaking for Ron and being his voice? His sister just came forward in November of 2019 and spoke to the Orange County Register. The article made a splash here locally. The Register mentioned their own article in Facebook on their own Facebook page, and there is a Reddit thread about Ron. I think there might be one article about him in the Las Vegas Review-Journal from back in 1997, but other than that, there's nothing. And sadly, I can't help but feel a part of the reason for that, other than the Las Vegas Metro Police and the NCIS failing to do a proper investigation into his case, is that nobody advocated for Ron at the time following his death, the most critical time to look for evidence and talk to people when something like this happens. And perhaps if somebody was advocating, they may have been largely discouraged by the way the Metro Police and the NCIS handled the investigation. Maybe they threw their hands up too and figured they were never going to know if the agencies in charge weren't going to do anything and just decided to give up. maybe Ron's family simply didn't have the energy or the desire or the ability to push the investigation into Ron's death. Maybe they couldn't do it logistically from all the way over in Peoria, Illinois. And the answer to dealing with his loss was to just put it in a little box and tuck it away and never speak of it. Fortunately, Ron's sister Diane has decided to try and advance his case forward. About a year ago, she found some documents related to her brother's case in her parents' things, and she combed through the reports. She began trying to get in touch with some of the individuals who were involved with this case, but if she was able to get anywhere is not yet clear. She told the Register that she thought about buying some billboard space in Orange County with its picture and a plea for information. She mentioned the Metro Police have turned Ron's case over to their dedicated cold case unit to take a renewed look at it with fresh eyes and maybe even start re-interviewing persons of interest. Now, when I say re-interviewing, I don't even know how many persons of interest may have been looked at back in '97, so if the Metro Police do speak to anyone at all, it may very well be the first time that person had ever been spoken to about Ron's death. And Rebecca Parkhurst, the woman with whom Ron had a clandestine relationship, marriage, and possible child, is on that list. Diane wants to know what happened to her brother, and she knows that somebody out there has the key to this mystery. So let's talk about theories. I'll go over a few that I found on Reddit, and then I'll go over what I think. The comment thread isn't all that extensive. Some of it is wildly imaginative, but I suppose when you don't know answers, anything is possible. So there is the thought that since Ron was hiding his wife and possibly a child from his family, that he was probably hiding other things as well. It is speculated that Ron and his family were not close, and maybe there was something about his family that he withdrew from to a point where he wouldn't even share the fact that he had started a family of his own. And the article in the Register specifically said that Ron's wife was not invited to the funeral. But I don't know if the family simply didn't tell her when and where the services were going to be held, if they specifically did not reach out to her, or if she tried to attend but was told not to come. All that's been said was she wasn't invited, which to me seems like a mistake to exclude her if that was the case. But it does kind of fall in line with the way Ron's family dealt with things in the wake of his death. The refusal to bring up his name, the refusal to reach out to the woman he was married to. But in the interest of solving this case, it seems to me that they may have benefited from reaching out and getting to know Rebecca, especially if they thought she may have had some information about what happened to Ron. Remember the idea of keeping your enemies close? That's what I'm saying. What I'm not saying is Rebecca Parkhurst was the enemy, but the fact that Ron secretly married her is an indication that he wanted to keep his family a certain distance away from his personal life. What better way to unravel the mystery than by extending that olive branch? Rebecca may have opted to keep her distance because who knows what Ron may have told her about them. But had they taken the opportunity to bridge that gap following Ron's death, to come together in grief, they may have been able to find out much more early on from the one person who was closest to him. There has also been the suggestion that perhaps Ron either killed himself or solicited someone to help him kill himself. Ron's actions in the days leading up to his death, to some, appears to be indicative of someone who is preparing to end his life. Leaving his job without notice, driving to Las Vegas, staying in a motel, sort of off the beaten path, gambling away all but $53 of his money. Is this a person who is having one last hurrah as he's working up to ending it all? Ron was shot in the back of the head, which is not usually indicative of the manner in which someone shoots themselves when committing suicide. The gun is typically placed at the temple or in the mouth. But it was also stated that it is possible to shoot oneself in the back of the head with a handgun. If Ron was right-handed, he could have craned his neck as far left as possible and positioned the gun pointed to the back of his head with his right hand and fired. He could have made his way out to the middle of the lake, shot himself in the back of the head. The gun would have sunk to the bottom of the lake. His body would have drifted, in this case for about 3 days. He would have been discovered with the gunshot wound. It would appear as though that he was tossed into the water, and it would be assumed that this was a murder, not a suicide. And in order to throw off the investigation even further, he would have had to have ditched his extensive CD collection and his ID and his ATM card to help bolster this being a murder by adding the element of a robbery. And why would Ron want to do all this? Well, one Reddit user speculated that the insurance policy wouldn't be paid out if Ron committed suicide, if indeed there was another insurance policy bought. But as a member of the military, his death benefits through that would have been paid even if Ron took his own life. If Ron's wife, Rebecca, had any additional policies, the suicide thing may have been an issue, but she definitely would have been able to collect his military death benefits. And then there's a thought that perhaps Ron himself did not want his death to be seen as a suicide. For maybe personal or religious reasons, perhaps to Ron, suicide was a shameful thing and he didn't want to be remembered as going out in that manner. But then, if Ron's intentions were to stage his suicide as appearing to be a homicide, it also leaves open the very real possibility of someone taking the fall for his death. Someone who would have had nothing to do with it. Would Ron have done that? I don't know. To me, I'm not feeling like this is a likely scenario. And the reason I think that is because, as I outlined earlier in the story, Ron seemed to not have put too much thought or planning into this trip to Vegas. He didn't search too hard for a low-key place to stay. He didn't go too far to go gambling. He didn't spend an exorbitant amount of money. And the whole going to Lake Mead and wading into the water and manipulating a gun to hold it in a way to fire the bullet into the back of his head, and not to mention getting rid of some key items to stage a robbery too, seems like a lot more planning than Ron was willing to make at any point during his time in Vegas. He seemed like a guy that didn't want to have anything on his mind, to be honest. But I don't know. Suicide or assisted suicide just feels unlikely to me. One Reddit user floated the idea that perhaps Ron wasn't gambling at all. Maybe he was taking out small increments of money to pay off someone to help him kill himself. So it leaves open this question. Was there actual proof that Ron was gambling? The MGM should have been investigated thoroughly, particularly the surveillance footage. Every single bit of footage from June 15th through the 18th should have been pored over by investigators. And the fact that the NCIS closed the case before the end of the month leads me to believe that the footage may not have been as thoroughly looked at as it should have been, if it was at all. They would have been able to determine where Ron was at specific times, when he came and went, what games he was playing, if he won money or if he lost money, and most importantly, if anyone was with him or if anyone remembers seeing him. One Reddit user felt suicide was a likely scenario based on the following. As a member of the military, Ron would have been prone to depression and suicidal ideation more so than the average citizen. Once a person decides he or she wants to commit suicide, they find themselves at peace with the decision. The struggle is living. Leaving life becomes the thing that they are looking forward to. So with a sense of having come to terms with ending his life, Ron decided to walk away from his job, home, and family to spend his last few days on his own in Vegas. that it is not unusual for a suicidal person to exhibit unforeseen changes in their conduct and actions, that because Ron wasn't spending a lot of money, it is likely he did not want to leave his family without, so if he had other accounts, he left those untouched, using only what little he had in his checking. He knew his wife and possibly his son would be okay once his death benefits were paid out, and that even though it would have been paid out even in the event of a suicide, Ron may or may not have been aware of that, and he may have been under the impression that it would be more complicated for the death benefits to be collected in the event of a suicide as opposed to a homicide. There has also been the suggestion that Ron may have struggled with addiction, gambling, or otherwise coupled with mental health issues. And this is purely speculation based pretty much on the things that we've been able to garner from the Register article. Is there anyone who could tell us if Ron had a gambling problem? Was there ever a history of substance abuse? Was Ron struggling mentally or emotionally? Was his up and running off to Las Vegas as spur of the moment as it was made out to be? It may have been. It was, as far as we know, the only time he'd ever abandoned his job, so it would seem somewhat out of character for him to leave without being granted the time off. He had an appointment that day with a recruit, which he obviously blew off. It is out of character for a Marine of 13 years with an exemplary record to do something like that, but was it out of character for Ron Parkhurst, a man who was seemingly estranged from his family for reasons known only to him, his parents, and maybe his sister, who also had a hidden marriage and possibly a hidden child? When you look at it like that, it really doesn't seem so out of character. The running, the hiding, the secrets. It actually kind of falls in line with many aspects of the way Ron Parkhurst lived his life, to be honest. So could the job stress have gotten to Ron? One Reddit user suggested that the stress of being in the Marines is high, even when you aren't being deployed. And this Reddit user even called the stress of being a recruiter next level. When you take on the job of recruiting, this is indicative of a person who intends to make a long-term career out of being in the Marines. There is an added pressure of making quotas, which, if those quotas aren't reached, then it may have an adverse effect on one's career. Finding recruits is difficult. Getting young people to sign up is no easy task, and it's even been suggested that potential future enlistees may even be told things that might not necessarily be accurate, or even go so far as to sign people up who might not be suited for the Marines just to get those numbers up. And perhaps the stress of it all caused Ron to suddenly have a mental break. For a man who's led a relatively regimented life for more than a dozen years, it would not be out of the question for it all to have come crashing down on him in a weak moment and he just up and left. But that still doesn't answer the questions as to what happened to him afterwards and how he ended up floating in Lake Mead. But it gives us a possible reason why he went to Vegas in the first place. There was also one suggestion that Ron perhaps got in over his head with gambling debts. Maybe he was borrowing money from the casino or from some person and he was killed over that. I don't put a lot of weight into that theory, mostly because it doesn't seem like anyone or any casino is going to front Ron any significant amount of money that's worth killing over when the guy had only $53 in his bank account. And it certainly doesn't make any sense to kill him because that's no way of getting money out of him. And besides that, the whole scenario sounds like something you would find in past Las Vegas lore, the old days of the mob and loan sharking and gambling rackets. So I don't put much weight into that theory. But the suggestion leaves me wondering if anyone was ever seen with Ron, and I know I keep coming back to that. Who was with him? Did he meet up with somebody there? Was Rebecca there? Did her whereabouts get investigated? Was he ever seen gambling or dining with anybody else? Did anyone see him come and go from his motel in the company of somebody else? Were his phone records checked? His cell phone, his home phone, his work phone, his motel phone? Did Ron have email accounts? Email was definitely growing in popularity at the time our story takes place in 1997. AOL popped up in 95, and services like Hotmail started showing up in 96. So, considering the job that Ron was in, I'm certain that he was a regular email user. I don't know if any of these things were ever checked. So, I have two theories that I think might be the most likely, but of course, nothing has been ruled out. This is just my opinion and my opinion alone. And I have alluded to these periodically through the telling of Ron's story. I think he was murdered. Obviously, this would have to involve at least one, perhaps two other individuals. My first theory is that Ron possibly encountered a person who intended to do him harm, whether it was somebody he met at the casino or on the strip, maybe at a bar or a restaurant, perhaps a sex worker. He may have been specifically targeted by someone. He was alone. Maybe he didn't appear to have much of a plan or a direction with what he was doing. There are always people watching other people for vulnerabilities. Maybe Ron came off as someone who was susceptible and weak, not physically, but rather mentally or emotionally. Maybe somebody befriended him during his time in Vegas, and maybe that someone gained his trust, and all the while had intentions of attempting to rob him, and not really knowing that he didn't have all that much money on him or in his account. It's hard to tell because we don't know what the investigation uncovered, and we don't know if there was any point where Ron was made to do anything or go anywhere under duress. If we knew what was on video surveillance, we might know these things, or in his phone records or in his emails. Maybe somebody had an idea to go hang out by the lakeside, and perhaps he went there willingly and was ambushed and murdered. This person could have been with him any number of times that he made his ATM withdrawals and watched as he entered his PIN number, only to realize that there was nothing left in the bank. This is why I'm so curious as to how much his phone and email records were examined, and if anyone knew of anybody that he was with during those 3 days before his death. I also think it's possible that perhaps Ron won big at the casino. Did he have a lucky streak in gambling? Did he come away with a good amount of money? And was there somebody watching or noticing him and his winnings and decided to follow him, rob him, and ended up killing him and dumping him in the lake? Whether or not Ron won big at the MGM is not known. And again, I have to wonder if investigators even explored that as a possibility. My second suspicion is that Ron's wife, Rebecca, had a hand in his death. I don't know if her whereabouts were ever investigated, but I definitely think she needed to be looked at then, and I think she needs to be looked at now. The whole thing we've gone over with Ron's family, all of his keeping secrets, hiding his marriage, all that stuff is irrelevant at this point. It is very possible that Rebecca saw that Ron may have had somewhat of a strained history with his family and used that as a way to isolate him even more from them. She knew she could marry him, and it would not be a problem for her to tell him to not tell his family about her and for him to agree. Eventually, the couple moved to California, isolating Ron even further from them. But then at some point, they started not living together anymore. And when he went to work for the recruiting office in Huntington Beach, he told his supervisor that he was single, and he was purportedly living in Irvine alone. So, where was Rebecca? We're not sure, but we know that they weren't together. They were separated in some capacity. They were breaking up, something like that. I don't know. Was it because she wanted out or because he wanted her out? Was Ron pulling away? Was Rebecca resisting? Why were they not living together? Was a divorce in the works? Was Ron planning to divorce her? was she planning to divorce him? Because if that was his plan, Rebecca was going to lose out on all the benefits of being a military wife. So, not wanting to lose that, is it possible she somehow lured him to Vegas? Or did she know that he abruptly went and followed him there? Or had someone else follow him there? Maybe the impromptu trip to Vegas wasn't about getting away from his job, but more about getting away from his wife? Maybe Rebecca knew that the marriage was doomed, and she made her move before he could file for divorce to ensure that she'd be able to collect his death benefits and any other insurance policies that she may have had on his life. As far as I know, she did at least collect on the death benefits, and that amount I believe is about $400,000. That's what it is today. I don't know if it was any less that many years ago. It's even been suggested that perhaps it was she who helped him carry out the suicide, but I don't think this was a suicide. I think Rebecca stood to lose Ron and everything that he had to offer her, so she killed him or had him killed before he had the chance to leave her. It's happened many, many times before, and it's probably going to keep happening, this whole spouses killing their spouses for financial gain or for whatever reasons. And I kind of feel like I've been talking a lot about those types of cases lately on this show. But anyways, what do you all think about this case? What do you believe happened to Ron Parkhurst? How did he end up dead, floating in Lake Mead with a bullet in the back of his head? Come to the Facebook page and share your thoughts on this case, or on Instagram or on Twitter. I do have plans to talk to Keith Sharon sometime in the very near future, and I will make sure to update you with anything new or different that I find. And that brings this 132nd episode of California Dreaming to a close. Please come over to the Facebook discussion group if you haven't done so yet and request to join. It is there that we discuss cases that we cover, we share our thoughts and opinions, not only about our show, but other podcasts that you listen to, documentaries that you've watched, books that you've read, as well as current news stories, breaking news, posts about your pets. I just posted some pictures of Fred playing cards with me. Post funny memes. Please come over and share. And you can also go over to the show's Facebook page, like that page, and leave a review or a recommendation. And you can also follow us on Twitter at CaliforniaPod and Instagram at California Dreaming Pod. And again, I just want to remind you about posting on Facebook. I told you in the previous episode, we are always very open and welcoming of all the posts in the group that the members have been making. We enjoy the engagement and the interaction and the things that bring about interesting discussions and open up meaningful conversations. And posts of all kinds are welcome, whether they're true crime related or if there is something in your personal life that you want to share because you can't share it on your personal page for some reason. You know that the California Dreaming Facebook discussion group is a safe place. We love the memes. We love the posts about our animals, our families, our children. We can discuss current news events, breaking news, crime news. You can even open up about something you might be struggling with, something that you need to seek advice about, something that you need to vent about. This group is now more than 1,600 people strong, and it has become abundantly clear that no matter what it is that is going on with you, you are not alone. You can also announce your triumphs and your wins, your successes, big brags, little brags, parent brags, humble brags. We want to hear it all and share in your joy. But just as a reminder, we want to keep our posts interesting, thought-provoking. We always enjoy a great conversation starter, and at the same time, we want to try to keep those posts relevant to the purpose of the community that we've created, as well as free of politics, religion, or things that are meant to incite or provoke hostility. We also want to avoid duplicate posts or irrelevant posts where we are becoming less interesting and more of a nuisance to those who follow us. We don't want to spam somebody's Facebook page. That being said, please keep all of your posts coming, but keep those caveats in mind when you do. We really appreciate every single one of you, and please feel free to reach out to me or any of the admins if you have any questions about anything. There is always one of us around to talk to. I would like to take the time to wish a very happy birthday to one of our admins, Kim H., on February 10th, Renee C. on February 12th, and Christine H. on February 13th. California Dreaming is brought to you by the Orbital Jigsaw Network, a podcast production company on a mission to create some of the best podcasts to listen to, with an eclectic roster of shows with content including true crime, history, sports entertainment, gaming, and social media. So visit our website at www.orbitaljigsaw.com. You can find links to all of our podcasts as well as a direct link to our merchandise store on TeePublic. Again, that's www.orbitaljigsaw.com. Thank you again so much for listening. I'm your host, Roseanne. Until next time, sweet dreams.